Hi boys and girls, welcome to day 19. This is your Great Mind Teacher lesson and your classroom teacher lesson all in one. You can work on this at whatever pace that you wish, but this day, lesson 24, however you want to put it, is going to be just due before winter break. So, between Monday and Tuesday, if you are not in our live lessons, you can do this at your own pace as long as it is done before the end of the day on Tuesday. So let's get started. So our central question is, how do cultural beliefs and values guide people? Our focusing question is, what important beliefs and values guide Chief Joseph and his daughter Sound of Running Feet? So we're going to be reading a lot today. So I really want you to be paying attention to anything that you can add to your handout 18B evidence organizer for Chief Joseph and for Sound of Running Feet. We are going to be answering some questions in your InSync journal and a quick check for understanding. So pay close attention as we read. So, what is the essential meaning of Chief Joseph's speech in Thunder Rolling in the Mountains is our content framing question today. So that means that we are going to get to the point that we read Chief Joseph's speech, and we're going to discuss it and figure out the essential meaning or the theme of his speech. So first, let's review chapters 14 to 16. I want you to think about what events and details in these chapters stood out as important and why. So go ahead, pause the video and think about this now, and then we're going to review some of those events. Okay, so key events in chapter 14 through 16. One of the first ones is that the Nez Perce reached the Crows, but the Crows refused to help. Then we have that the tribe decides to travel north to join Sitting Bull, and if you remember, Sitting Bull is in Canada. Then the Crows join the Bluecoats to fight against the Nez Perce. So think about that. Native Americans are fighting against the Nez Perce here. Their food supply runs low and the weather turns colder. And Lean Elk and Looking Glass argue. Looking Glass takes command and they travel more slowly. So we're going to reread the passage on page 90 and think about what details in this passage might offer clues about what will happen next. And what do you predict will happen next? So we're going to go ahead and read that, and then you're just going to think about that on your own. Okay, so take a minute to get to page 90, and I'm going to read those two paragraphs to you. A misshapen moon streaked with red rode low in the eastern sky. I wondered if the ugly moon was a warning from the great spirit chief. Was it blood I saw on the rising moon? That night I lay awake worrying about the soldiers. I heard the ponies moving about. They were restless. I was restless too. I trembled at the thought of what the morning might bring. So, what details in this passage might offer clues about what will happen next, and what do you think will happen next? Okay, so our next task is to read chapter 17 through 19. And we're going to think about the sequence of events that leads to Chief Joseph's decision at the end of chapter 19. Okay, 17 to 19, here we go.
Chapter 17. The morning air was cold with a hint of snow. Clouds gathered in the sky. We began to pack our things. Some people sat by their fires. They chewed on buffalo meat from last night's feast. Bending Willow was in the arms of Deer Woman, having her morning milk. Children played games beside the stream with sticks and balls of mud. We were happy with the thought that in 2 suns we would be in safe country. Scouts rode into camp, their braids flying behind them. "Buffalo!" they shouted. "Stampeding buffalo!" Only one thing would stampede the buffalo: Bluecoats. The soldiers were near. I hurried, but my fingers would not obey me. The knots in the rawhide that held the skin shelter remained fast. "Do not hurry," said a voice. Looking Glass rode by our shelter. He went from one end of the camp to the other, saying, "Go slow. We have much time." I slowed down. My fingers began to work again. A short while later I heard a shriek. It came from young Joseph, who was across the stream. He pointed at a bluff behind us. There, outlined against the morning sky, sat a warrior on a spotted horse. On his head was a war bonnet of eagle feathers. It was a Cheyenne who scouted for the Bluecoats. Young Joseph splashed through the icy water. He came out of the stream with his teeth chattering. He had lost his moccasins and only wore a shirt. I wrapped him in a buffalo robe and pushed him into a gulch. The sound of galloping horses grew loud. All the Bluecoats in the world must have been on the other side of the rise. I looked up to see soldiers riding down upon us, Bluecoats on horses spread out in two wide wings that circled the camp. They were led by Cheyenne scouts. People were running in every direction. My father ran toward the herd. "The horses!" he called. "Save the horses!" Warriors grabbed their rifles and got into gullies and behind rocks. Hoofbeats and gunfire made it hard to hear. Through the line of Bluecoats stampeded our horses, their eyes wild, their manes streaming. My father rode with them. He had no gun, no bow. There were white soldiers on every side of him. I held my breath. With a burst of speed he reached us and jumped from his horse. Blood coursed down the side of his horse, but it was not the blood of my father. His guardian spirit rode with him. Chief Joseph caught a pony as it raced by. Handing me the reins, he said, "Flee, daughter. Ride to the north. Go to Sitting Bull." He ran to help others. I stood with the reins in my hand. Bullets flew around me. I looked for Deer Woman, but she was not there. I looked into the gully. Young Joseph crouched at the bottom. Beside him knelt a woman who was great with child. I motioned for them to climb out. "Here," I said. "Ride for Sitting Bull, now." Young Joseph pushed the woman on the horse and climbed up behind her. I slapped the pony and it bolted off. I saw many people grabbing horses and riding away. A woman rode by on a gray horse. A Cheyenne rode up, hoofs pounding, and grabbed her bridle. He fired his pistol. The bullet struck her in the back and she fell to the ground. Caught in a rain of bullets, horses screamed and died. I looked around for another pony, but the horses had gone. I was trapped. I leaped into the gully. Bullets passed over my head. I could not look out. I hoped that Bending Willow and Deer Woman were safe. I heard war cries and gunfire above me. The war whoops of our warriors mingled with the shouts of the white soldiers. Then the fighting moved away. A warrior rolled over the edge and into the gully beside me. He landed heavily in the dirt. It was Swan Necklace. Blood covered his left arm. He had a gun in each hand. "Keep them loaded," he said. He tossed me one of the guns and a pouch of bullets. "We have pushed the Bluecoats out of our camp. Now we will fight to the death." All that day we fought penned in the gully. The Bluecoats fired at us from behind rocks. Some shot from behind their dead horses. We were too busy to talk, but our eyes spoke for us. When the shadows fell, the firing died away. Now and again a lone rifle barked. Without the sun, the air grew even colder. Some of us were wrapped in robes, but like swan necklace, our warriors were stripped for battle. They fought without leggings. They had no shirts, and most had no moccasins. Wearing only breechcloth, they shivered in the cold. Snow fell silently over the land. In the gathering darkness, I peered over the edge of the gully and saw bodies strewn across the plain. Children cried with cold and fear and pain. People began to crawl across the ground, keeping flat so the soldiers would not see them. Warriors came in from the rocks and hollows. They brought news. The news was not good. Many were dead. 3 of our dead were women, and the rest were warriors. Some of our greatest warriors would fight no more. Brave Olcott, my uncle, was dead. He had fought from behind a rock, where he had killed many bluecoats. But when he rose to fire his rifle, he was struck in the forehead. Tuhohosot was dead. His body lay on the field in front of the bluecoats, where we could not retrieve it. Lone Bird was dead. Lean Elk was dead. These last 2 deaths were bitter, because the bullets that killed them did not come from bluecoats, but from our own warriors who mistook them for Cheyenne scouts. We buried our dead, those we could reach. As we did at Big Hole, we dug shallow graves in the sides of the gullies. There was no time for a proper burial. We shoved them into the holes and covered them with earth. We had plenty of buffalo chips, but did not start fires. The light would give the bluecoats an easy target. We shared cold buffalo and cakes of camas root. I did not eat, nor did most of the other women. We gave the food to the children first, then to the warriors. We had gone all day without water. 2 by 2 we crawled to the stream. We tied buffalo horn cups to rawhide and let them down into the water. When it was my turn, I gulped the icy water. It was sweeter than honey to my dry throat. No one slept that night. With camas hooks and knives, we dug deep trenches to shelter our people. Above the trenches, on the low bluffs, we dug shallow rifle pits for the warriors. We used pans to throw the dirt out of the holes we dug. As I dug with my camas hook, I wondered if we would ever be safe. Chapter 18. Morning came, but the sun hid its face. The cold wind was thick with falling snow. Between our camp and the soldiers, the snow was so deep that I could not make out the bodies that littered the frozen ground. With first light, the shooting began. Soon the air was filled with smoke from rifles, and I could no longer see the falling snowflakes. Through the mist, I saw flashes of guns. That day, while the warriors fought, we dug tunnels in the damp earth with our knives and camas hooks. By nightfall, we could scoot on our stomachs from one sheltering gully to the next. I crept through the tunnels until I found Deer Woman. She and Bending Willow were safe. I swept Bending Willow in my arms and held her close. She waved her small fists and gurgled with laughter. My sister had been on this earth for 4 moons. I thought that she might not live to see another moon. I gave Deer Woman the buffalo meat I had not eaten. She needed food to make milk for my sister. That night I stayed in the gully with Deer Woman and Bending Willow. We sat with our backs against the dirt wall. Our hearts were heavy and we talked little. I slept briefly, but mostly I thought of our beautiful valley, of its blue lakes and its wandering streams, its mountain peaks and sheltering valleys, its tall trees and green meadows. I thought I would never see it again. When the sky grew light, the battle began anew. By now, those who could escape had reached Sitting Bull. Word passed through the tunnels that he would surely send a war party of Sioux to help us. If help did not come soon, we would be beaten. Our warriors were careful to shoot only when they saw a careless bluecoat, but our bullets would not last forever. The rifle fire from the soldiers died away. It became a war of sharpshooters, but the soldiers' big cannon spoke all day. It threw bursting shells into the air. Pieces of metal rained down on us, and we held buffalo hides above our heads to keep them off. Sometime after midday, the soldiers stopped firing the cannon. A great quiet spread over the plain. I heard shouts and climbed onto a heap of buffalo skins so I could look over the edge of the gully. The snow had stopped, and I could see across the plain. My heart caught in my throat. A white flag waved above the camp of the bluecoats. It was the sign for truce. A voice called, "Colonel Miles wants to see Joseph." My father did not trust the soldiers. He sent Tom Hill, a Nimipu who could speak the white man's words, to talk with the bluecoats. Before the sun had crept the width of a lodgepole, Tom Hill called for my father. The colonel would meet Joseph in the space between the two camps. My father left his rifle pit. With two warriors, he walked toward the soldiers' camp. Several bluecoats walked toward him. General Howard was not with them. One of the soldiers had silver birds on his shoulder. It was Colonel Miles. Tom Hill walked beside him. They met in the center of the plain. Chief Joseph laid down his rifle. The warriors placed their rifles on the ground. For a time, they talked to the bluecoats. The colonel waved his arms and pointed at our camp, and then behind him. My father shook his head and made the hand sign that means never. He turned and began walking back to his rifle pit. The white colonel pulled a pistol from his belt. The other bluecoats grabbed my father and held his arms in back of him. They shoved him around and marched him back to the soldiers' camp. Anger rose in my throat. Again the bluecoats had broken a truce. My father trusted too much, and now he was a prisoner. Then something strange happened. A white officer rode into our camp. It was a curious thing for him to do. Yellow Bull acted quickly. As the officer passed him, Yellow Bull grabbed the reins with one hand and pulled the bluecoat from his horse with the other. Our warriors surrounded the officer and pushed him into the gully where I stood. The warriors jumped down after him. "Kill him!" shouted Two Moons. He pulled a knife from his belt and took one step toward the officer. "Yes, kill the soldier who wars on women and children," said Swan Necklace. "Kill the soldier who shames the flag of truce," said Ferocious Bear. The warriors moved closer to the officer. His back was pressed against the wall of earth, but he did not drop his eyes. He looked at Two Moon, and his gaze was steady. Yellow Bull stepped between them. "Wait," he said. Whitebird came through the tunnel. He stood and stretched out his hand. "You are children," he said. "Do not harm this man. As long as he lives, Joseph is safe. When he dies, the Bluecoats will kill Joseph." Tom Hill, who was back among us, came in from one of the rifle pits. He talked with the officer and changed his words so we could understand. The officer's name was Lieutenant Jerome. He had come to see if we were ready to surrender. Whitebird laughed, but it was a dry sound without joy. "This Bluecoat is also a child," he said. "Let him stay in this shelter. Yellow Bull will guard him. Sound of Running Feet will see that he has water and food and a buffalo robe to keep him warm. Those are my words." The old chief leapt through the tunnel and worked his way back to the rifle pits. Two Moons beckoned to Swan Necklace and crawled into the tunnel. Before leaving, Swan Necklace turned toward me and put his hand over his heart in a sign of love. The soldier spent the night wrapped warmly in a buffalo robe. He slept soundly, but Yellow Bull and I did not sleep at all. When the soldier awoke, he washed his hands and face in water that I brought from the stream. He drank 2 buffalo horns filled with water and ate buffalo meat and cold mush while Yellow Bull and I watched. He walked back and forth, back and forth. Yellow Bull's eyes followed him. He sat with his rifle across his knees. The soldier had no chance to escape, but he showed no fear. The soldier Jerome pulled a piece of white paper from his pocket. He took out a pencil and made many marks on the paper. Then he called for Tom Hill. When Tom Hill came into the shelter, the soldiers spoke the marks. Tom Hill told us what the marks said. They said that the soldier had good food, a warm bed, and good treatment. He hoped that the Bluecoats were treating Chief Joseph the same way. Whitebird sent Tom Hill to the Bluecoats with a talking paper. Soon Tom Hill was back with a talking paper for the soldier. It said that the white colonel would send my father back to us if we would let the soldier Jerome go free. "No," said Whitebird. "The Bluecoats have tricked us before. They will not trick us again. If the colonel speaks true, he will bring Joseph to the ground where we met before. We will bring the soldier Jerome to the same ground." Tom Hill put these words so the soldier could understand. He changed them into marks on the paper, and Tom Hill carried it back to the white colonel. He watched as Tom Hill entered the camp of the Bluecoats. We waited. Soon my father walked onto the plain. White officers were on each side of him. Yellow Bull told the soldier Jerome to climb out of the gully. Whitebird and Looking Glass waited for him. Two Moons and Ferocious Bear joined them. All walked out to meet the Bluecoats. The soldier Jerome shook hands with my father. They changed places. Our chiefs and warriors brought my father back to our camp. The Bluecoats pulled down their white flag, and the shooting began. Chapter 19. Our warriors fought the rest of that day and the next. They fought with new anger. Chief Joseph had not been treated as an honored prisoner. The Bluecoats tied his hands behind him, then tied his hands to his feet. They rolled him in a blanket like a papoose. He could not stand. He could not walk. He could not use his arms. The white soldiers slept in a tent, but my father lay all night beside the mules without food or water. He was not untied until the paper that speaks came from the soldier Jerome. 2 sons came and went. We had lost no people since the first day of battle, but food was short. Soon, even the children would have to go hungry. We were cold and wet with snow. The cruel wind cut to our very bones. The children cried. The women and old men said nothing, but there was pain in their eyes. The 3rd son was a sad time for us. The sadness began in the morning when it grew light and we saw that a party of white soldiers had arrived during the darkness. The one-armed general had joined Colonel Miles. An army of bluecoats would soon spread across the land. When the shooting began that morning, the first shell fell among us. During the night, the white soldiers had dug a trench for their cannon, and the shells no longer struck the bluffs beyond the rifle pits. Another act of shame. The soldier Jerome knew that no warriors were in the shelter pits. Again, they warred on the helpless. Shells fell among the women and the children, the old men and the wounded warriors. One shell burst in a shelter pit, covering 6 of our people with earth. We dug fast, scooping away the choking dirt with pots and hats in our hands. I pulled a small boy from the pit. His eyes and ears and mouth were full of earth, and he gasped for air, but he was safe. Others dragged 3 women to safety, but we could not reach an old woman and her granddaughter. There was too much dirt. Without air, they died. My father said that we were beaten. The time had come to surrender. Not everyone agreed. Some of the warriors wanted to charge the bluecoats. They said the bluecoats were bad fighters. We might whip them and be free to join Sitting Bull. They would be glad to die for the people. My father said no. We could not fight the cannon, and there were too many soldiers. All our warriors would die, and the women and children and old men would be at the mercy of the bluecoats. My father reminded them of what had happened to the women and children at Big Hole. It was better to return to Lapwai and live on the reservation. Looking Glass said he would never surrender. He looked at my father. I am older than you, he said. I know the white generals are men with 2 faces and 2 tongues. If you surrender, you will be sorry. It is better to be dead. Whitebird held up his hand. Looking Glass speaks the truth, he said. Surrender if you wish. We will not stop you. We will take those who would rather die and strike out for the old lady's country. The council broke up. The sadness was not yet over. A rider on horseback appeared in the distance. Looking Glass believed it was a Sioux scout, part of a band from Sitting Bull. He stepped out of his rifle pit for a close look. A bullet struck him in the head, and he fell sprawled and silent on the ground. We had lost another chief. Now only my father and Whitebird were left to lead us. My father was not a war chief, and Whitebird was old. Under a white flag, my father crossed the plain to the camp of the bluecoats. The day was gray, and he was wrapped in a gray blanket. His head was down. His rifle lay across the saddle. Wearily, he climbed from his horse and walked up to Colonel Miles. "Let us stop fighting," said Colonel Miles. "No more battles, no more blood." The one-armed general stood beside him. Ice crystals clung to his beard. "The war is over," he said. "I have lost brothers. Many of you have lost brothers. Do not worry more. It is time for us to rest." Even with his head bowed, my father towered over General Howard. He drew his blanket closer about him and nodded but did not speak. Colonel Miles said that he had plenty of food and warm blankets for us. He promised that he would take our people to a nearby camp for the winter. Then we could all go back to our old homes. The one-armed general watched Chief Joseph and Colonel Miles shake hands. Then my father walked back to his pony and picked up his rifle. General Howard reached for it. Chief Joseph pulled back the hand holding the gun. He stood very tall. He looked down at the one-armed general. "I am not surrendering to you," he said. He pointed to Colonel Miles. "This is the man that ran me down." My father turned to Colonel Miles. He handed him his gun, butt first. Then he stepped back. "I am tired of fighting," he said. "Our chiefs are killed. Looking Glass is dead. The old men are all killed. He who led the young men is dead. It is cold, and we have no blankets. The little children are freezing to death. My people, some of them, have run away to the hills and have no blankets, no food. No one knows where they are, perhaps freezing to death. I want time to look for my children and see how many of them I can find. Maybe I shall find them among the dead." He raised his arm. His blanket flapped in the raw wind. "Hear me, my chiefs," he called. "I am tired. My heart is sick and sad. From where the sun now stands, I will fight no more forever." In sorrow, he drew his blanket over his head. One by one, our warriors stepped from the rifle pits and filed across the plain. They laid their rifles on the ground in front of the generals. From the shelter pits came the women and children, followed by the old. Wounded warriors crawled from the pits. Some of them leaned on the women and old men. Some of them crawled on their hands and knees. Slowly, the long lines of people moved across the ground and up the hill. My heart was filled with sadness. I could not join them. Even when I saw dear woman trudge slowly up the hill bearing Bending Willow on her back, I could not join them.
Wow, those were some really powerful chapters in our novel. So I want you to take a minute and think, what does it mean to surrender? What does it mean to surrender? Surrendering means to give up or to give in to another's powers or demands. Okay, so this is a question that we're definitely going to need to think about. What are some key events in these chapters that impacted Chief Joseph's decision to surrender? And how do you think each event impacted his decision? So go ahead and pause this video now, and I want you to think about that question. Okay, so we had deaths of multiple leaders. We had Ollicott, Tahuhulsut, and Lenauk. There was the arrival of General Howard's soldiers and the cannon fire into the Nez Perce shelter pits Okay, so all major all major events that impacted Chief Joseph's decision to surrender. Okay, so what we're going to do now is you're going to answer some text-dependent questions in your InSync journal. And I'm just going to kind of read them to you, and you're going to pause the video and answer them on your own. So I want you to turn to pages 104 and 105, beginning with, "My father said that we were beaten." Page 104 and 105, "My father said that we were beaten." And we're going to read to the line on page 105, ending with, "My father was not a war chief, and Whitebird was old," which is basically at the end of 105. So I'm going to read that to you now. "My father said that we were beaten. The time had come to surrender. Not everyone agreed. Some of the warriors wanted to charge the Bluecoats. They said the Bluecoats were bad fighters. We might whip them and be free to join Sitting Bull. They would be glad to die for the people. My father said no, we could not fight the cannon, and there were too many soldiers. All our warriors would die, and the women and children and old men would be at the mercy of the Bluecoats. My father reminded them of what had happened to the women and children at Big Hole. It was better to return to Lapway and live on the reservation. Looking Glass said he would never surrender. He looked at my father. I am older than you, he said. I know the white generals are men with 2 faces and 2 tongues. If you surrender, you will be sorry. It is better to be dead. Whitebird held up his hand. Looking Glass speaks the truth, he said. Surrender if you wish. We will not stop you. We will take those who would rather die and strike out for the old lady's country. The council broke up. The sadness was not yet over. A rider on horseback appeared in the distance. Looking Glass believed it was a Sioux scout, part of the band from Sitting Bull. He stepped out of his rifle pit for a close look. A bullet struck him in the head, and he fell sprawled and silent on the ground. We had lost another chief. Now only my father and Whitebird were left to lead us. My father was not a war chief, and Whitebird was old. So for the first question in your InSync journal, what arguments do some of the warriors, including Looking Glass and Whitebird, make against surrendering, on pages 104 and 105? So go ahead and pause the video and answer that now. Okay, so you might have said that some of the warriors believe that the Bluecoats are weak fighters, and if they charge, they could defeat them, even if some of them die in the process. And Looking Glass and Whitebird believe that the white generals will not keep their promises if the Nez Perce surrender. They would rather try to escape and ride for Sitting Bull's camp in Canada, even if they die trying. Okay, number 2, what arguments does Chief Joseph make in favor of surrendering? What event finally causes Chief Joseph to decide to surrender? So go ahead and pause the video now and respond to that in your InSync journal. Okay, so now that you've responded, let's think about it. Chief Joseph believes that they cannot win against the soldiers and their cannons. He believes that if they continue to fight, all of the warriors will die and there will be no one left to protect the women and children. He believes the best option is to surrender and return to the Lapway reservation. And in the end, Looking Glass is shot, leaving only Chief Joseph, who is not a warrior, and Whitebird, who is very old. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to read his surrender speech. And I really want you to pay attention to the language that really helps you understand how he is feeling in this scene. I am tired of fighting, he said. Our chiefs are killed. Looking Glass is dead. The old men are all killed. He who led the young men is dead. It is cold and we have no blankets. The little children are freezing to death. My people, some of them, have run away to hills and have no blankets, no food. No one knows where they are, perhaps freezing to death. I want time to look for my children and see how many of them I can find. Maybe I shall find them among the dead. He raised his arm. His blanket flapped in the raw wind. Hear me, my chiefs, he called. I am tired. My heart is sick and sad. From where the sun now stands, I will fight no more forever. What reasons does Chief Joseph give in this speech for surrendering? And what do his main concerns reveal about him as a leader? So go ahead and pause the video now and respond to that question in your Instinct Journal. Okay, so he explains that his people are in no position to continue fighting. Many of his people, including the older chieftains, are dead. His people are freezing to death. They have no blankets, and many have run away and have no food. He is tired of fighting and wants it to end. His main concern, according to the speech, is finding and taking care of his people, making sure they are safe, fed, and warm. And this shows us that he cares deeply for his people and their welfare. Okay, number 4. What do you notice about the length and types of sentences in this speech? How do these sentences help you understand Chief Joseph's attitude toward surrendering and toward his audience? So if you need to go back, it's on page 107. I am tired of fighting, and it ends with I will fight no forever. I will fight no more forever. So go ahead and pause the video and respond to this question. All right, so there are many short, simple sentences that give facts. I'm tired of fighting. Our chiefs are killed. Looking Glass is dead. These short, simple, factual sentences show that Chief Joseph is being direct and honest. He does not want to argue. He simply wants to find and care for his people. Number 5, reread this line. I want to have time to look for my children and see how many of them I can find. Who is Chief Joseph referring to when he says, my children? And how does this phrase help you understand how he views himself and his role as a leader? So go ahead and pause the video now to answer that question. This is number 5 in your Instinct Journal. Okay, so Chief Joseph is calling all of his people my children, not just the young ones. So this shows us that he views himself as a father figure or guardian to all of his people. He feels responsible for their safety and well-being. Number 6, what does Chief Joseph mean when he says, from where the sun now stands, I will fight no more forever? How would the meaning of this line change without the word forever at the end? What effect is created by including this word? Okay, so now that you've answered number 6 in your Instinct Journal, he means from this moment forward, so from where the sun now stands, he is finished fighting. He wants peace and safety for his people. Without the word forever, we can still understand that Chief Joseph is determined to fight no more. And the addition of this word emphasizes or stresses his decision to not fight anymore. Okay, and now our last question, number 7 in your Instinct Journal. Read the rest of page 107 following Chief Joseph's speech. What feelings does this scene, I think there's a type of that. What feelings does this scene bring up in you as a reader? Sorry, there's an extra in there. What words and images contribute to this mood and feeling? So I'm going to go to page 107, and I suggest you do the same. Okay, and beginning at 1 by 1, it's about halfway down the page in 107. 1 by 1, our warriors stepped from the rifle pits and filed across the plain. They laid their rifles on the ground in front of the generals. From the shelter pits came the women and children, followed by the old. Wounded warriors crawled from the pits. Some of them leaned on the women and old men. Some of them crawled on their hands and knees. Slowly, the long lines of people moved across the ground and up the hill. My heart was filled with sadness. I could not join them. Even when I saw a dear woman trudge slowly up the hill bearing Bending Willow on her back, I could not join them. So go ahead and pause the video now, and I want you to answer number 7 in your Instinct Journal. Okay, so this scene brings up feelings of deep sadness and heartbreak. words and images that create this feeling include wounded warriors crawled from the pits. Some of them leaned on the women and old men. Some of them crawled on their hands and knees, and slowly the long lines of people moved across the ground and up the hill. Okay, so the last thing that we're going to do is you can go ahead and press submit on your InSync journal once you finish that last question. And then I want you to open up the Day 19 Check for Understanding in your Schoology for today. We're going to go ahead and I've put blank response boxes in between where these lines are, so you'll actually just kind of fill in the blanks. So complete the following sentences in your journal. We're reflecting on the impact and central message of Chief Joseph's surrender speech. So, as I read Chief Joseph's words, or as I read Chief Joseph's words, I felt blank, and you'll fill in that blank, because blank. One of the central messages that Chief Joseph communicates in his speech is blank. And the most important idea I took away from reading his speech is blank. Sorry, so you can go ahead and fill this out on Schoology and press submit when you are finished, and then we're going to go on and we are going to finish the book together, and that is going to be, actually, are we finishing the book? Oh, nope, I'm sorry. There will still be one more chapter that I guess we will read after break.
Thunder Rolling in the Mountains, Chapter 20. The light faded, and darkness came as I crouched in the gully. The bluecoats bandaged the wounds of our warriors and let the people bury our dead. They passed out food and blankets. Smoke rose from cooking fires. The smell of food filled my mouth with water. I had not eaten for 3 days. Hungry and cold and sad, I huddled against the dirt wall and shut my eyes. While my father spoke to the generals, Whitebird and a large band of our people had slipped away from the camp and started north. Now they were a long march away. I must start alone for the old lady's country, I told myself. But I would wait until the camp was asleep. As the night wore on, voices died away. Soon all was quiet. A horse nickered. A man coughed. A baby cried. Nothing more. Still, I waited. I waited until the stars moved the space of my 2 hands across the heavens. Then I wrapped a pan, a knife, and a buffalo horn for water in my wedding blanket. I crawled to the end of the gully that was farthest from the camp. As I crept over the dirt, my hand touched something hard and cold. I ran my fingers over the object. It was a rifle. I stuck the barrel through the knot on my bundle and pulled myself out of the gully. The glow of watchfires outlined the edge of the camp. I crawled to the creek, squeezed through the brush, and let myself over the side. Silent as a snake in a stream, I slid down the bank to the water. Before I could get up, a strong hand clamped over my mouth. Another hand grabbed my arm. "Quiet," whispered a rough voice. Fear struck through me. I did not move. The hands relaxed their grip. "Are you not going home with Chief Joseph?" asked the voice, gentler now. I peered through the darkness. It was Swan Necklace. He had not surrendered with the warriors. A burst of joy rose in me. "I am going to Sitting Bull," I said. "I will never go with the white man." "Let us start," said Swan Necklace. "Better we die together than trust ourselves to those who speak with 2 tongues." We followed the creek until it turned back toward the camp. Then we climbed out of the gully and began to walk toward the star that never moves. Snow covered the ground. Swan Necklace was still stripped for battle. He had no moccasins. I untied my bundle and cut strips of buffalo hide from the robe. Swan Necklace wrapped his feet in the soft fur and pulled our wedding blanket around his shoulders. He carried our guns, and I carried the rest. We walked until light streaked the sky. My moccasins were worn, and my feet ached with cold. Swan Necklace said nothing, but his legs were bare. Swan Necklace found us a protected place out of the wind. While he dug a hollow on the side of the hill, I looked for buffalo chips. They were covered with snow and hard to spot, but I found enough for a small fire. We rubbed each other's feet to warm them, then huddled beneath the blanket. Heat from the fire spread through us, and we slept until the sun was high. I woke to the touch of Swan Necklace's fingers. He brushed my cheek until my eyes opened. "Wake, my love," he said softly. "We must be on our way." It was our first good sleep since our people came through the bear paws. I scrubbed my face with snow to waken me. We had no food. I cut the elk hide fringe from my skirt, and we chewed the strips as we walked. It fooled our stomachs for a time. There's a typo, the word no doesn't belong there. It fooled our stomachs for a time. The going was hard. Cold wind blew down from the old lady's country. We had to push hard against it. Its icy fingers poked under our robes and made us shiver. It was almost dusk when Swan Necklace spotted an antelope searching for grass in the snow. He aimed carefully. The shot echoed through the quiet air and the antelope fell dead. We ran to where it lay, its blood making a scarlet pool in the snow. Swan Necklace knelt and began to skin the antelope. I pulled out my knife to help him. Suddenly, a hunting party rode over the hill. They galloped toward us. The snow muffled the sound of the horses' hoofs, but the jingle of their bridles sounded loud in my ears. I knew by their rawhide saddles that they were Assiniboines. My heart beat like a woodpecker pounding on a lodgepole. The Assiniboines were a fierce tribe and made many wars. They had never been our friends. Were they helping the Bluecoats as the Cheyennes and the Crows and the Flatheads had done? The horses stopped beside us. There were 5 riders and 5 extra horses. They had been on a long hunt, and 2 of the horses carried meat and hides. Their leader raised his arm in greeting. He had been on this earth as many snows as my father. Strips of ermine showed white in his braids. His beaded moccasins were made of soft elk skin. Beneath his saddle was a fine blanket of red wool and otter skins. It was a chief's blanket. Across his saddle lay an old musket, the kind most of our warriors used before we picked up rifles on the battlefield. The other 4 men had no guns. They carried bows made from the horns of mountain sheep. They must have traded with our people for them, because only the Nimipu made such bows. The leader made signs to say that all the tribes were brothers. He touched his chest and said his name was Red Elk. We signed back that we were friends and said our names. We signed that we were fleeing from the Bluecoats and on the way to join Sitting Bull. Red Elk nodded. He spoke a few words of our language. With signs and words, he told us that the hunting party was on its way to a nearby Assiniboine village. We were welcome to join them. His words were good, but I did not trust him. When Red Elk saw our fine rifles that had once belonged to white soldiers, his eyes gleamed. His eyes followed them as we put them across our saddles. His eyes stayed on them all the way to the Assiniboine village. Mountains, Chapter 21. Red Elk rode into the village. Teepees clustered near a stream and fires burned bright beside them. A vast herd of ponies was tethered beyond the teepees. Women, children, and old men shouted greetings. They came to look at the load of meat, and they came to look at us. They stared hard. A child poked Swan Necklace's foot wrappings with a curious finger. A woman touched my elkskin skirt. The leather was white as snow, and it had taken many suns to sew on the blue quills. She rubbed the skirt between her fingers, then frowned when she saw the ragged edges. I was glad that I had cut away the fringe to stay our hunger. It saved my skirt. Red Elk motioned to Swan Necklace and me. We got off the horses and followed him to his teepee. Children pointed at us as we walked through the village. Dogs barked. I wondered what the Assiniboines would do with us. At Red Elk's teepee, a lighting dove, his wife, was cooking. She was a small woman and moved quickly like a bird. She speared a chunk of antelope meat and placed it over the fire. In a large pot, goose mush bubbled. The goods made me feel weak. Swan Necklace ate with Red Elk and Charging Hawk his son. A lighting dove and I brought them food. Charging Hawk was a young warrior. He had more snows than Swan Necklace, but he did not have a wife. He was short and thick through the chest. Pieces of shell from the land of the great waters gleamed green and blue and silver in his braids. He wore fringed leggings and a buckskin shirt trimmed with elk's teeth. On each arm were many copper bracelets. Red Elk told Swan Necklace that we were a long day's walk from the old lady's country. If we started before the first sun, we would be there in darkness. Swan Necklace nodded. He used signs to tell Red Elk about the surrender, and Red Elk said he had seen our people begin a long march toward the rising sun. After the men had eaten, a lighting dove and I made our meal. My hunger was so great that I ate with unseemly haste. I saw her watching me and ducked my head with shame. Then I chewed slowly until my hunger was gone. A lighting dove looked at my worn moccasins and pulled a new pair from a pack. I thanked her with signs, and she patted me on the shoulder. She seemed kind. Charging Hawk gave Swan Necklace a pair of moccasins and an old shirt and leggings. When Swan Necklace put them on, the sleeves barely covered his elbows and the leggings ended just below his knees. Red Elk and his son laughed at the sight. I was beginning to forget my fear and slept well that night in the tent of Red Elk. The morning sky was streaked with red. We started off before the sun. A lighting dove gave us a packet of food, and Red Elk gave us 10 bullets for our rifles. We had walked only a short way from the village when I heard a footstep behind us. That was all. There was one more step. Then a knife flashed and Swan Necklace lay on the ground with a deep gash in his neck. I turned quickly and saw Charging Hawk wiping the blood from his knife. My rifle was not loaded. Before I could pull the knife from my belt, I felt a noose slip around my neck. It drew tight, and the world went black. I opened my eyes. Above me was the wall of Red Elk's teepee. My ankles were tied together, and so were my wrists. I looked around. A lighting dove sat next to the opening. She was sewing red and blue beads on a moccasin. I shut my eyes and pretended I was not awake. I thought hard. I remembered the look in Red Elk's eyes when he saw our rifles. I knew Swan Necklace was dead. I wondered why I still lived, but I did not care. It made no difference now if they killed me. The shadows were long when a lighting dove shook me. I looked at her with eyes of hate, but said nothing. She untied my ankles and wrists and led me down to the stream. I could not run away because she held fast to the rawhide around my arm. When I was ready to leave, she touched me over my heart and touched her eyes and then her heart. She signed that she felt my grief. Her fingers were gentle, and so were her eyes. Tears spilled out of my eyes and ran down my cheeks. I could not speak. A lighting dove led me to the place where Swan Necklace lay dead. She signaled that I might bury him. I wrapped my love in our wedding blanket. On his chest I placed his war whistle, which had protected him in battle, but did not save him from death. I laid him in a shallow grave and chanted a song of mourning. The death of Swan Necklace had taken my heart away. In my breast, where my heart once beat, was a piece of cold stone. Thunder Rolling in the Mountains, Chapter 22. For 7 suns I stayed in the teepee of Red Elk. I was not permitted to go outside unless a lighting dove held the rawhide lead. At night I was tethered to a teepee pole like a horse. The rifles that Red Elk had taken from us were always before my eyes. He wrapped the barrels in antelope hide and placed them against the wall of the teepee. All day I looked at them, and all day I thought of the treachery that had led to the death of Swan Necklace. At first I did not know why my life was spared. Red Elk paid no attention to me. He looked through me and never spoke. A lighting dove was kind, but never asked me to work. Yet a captive woman is not allowed to be idle. I listened to their talk. After a few suns, some of their words had meaning. I did not let them know how many Assiniboine words I had learned. From their talk at night, I discovered that Charging Hawk once had a wife. She had died 3 snows before. She was big with child, and her baby died with her. For 3 snows, Charging Hawk had grieved and looked at no other woman, even though Red Elk urged him to take a new wife. Now Charging Hawk had plans for me. He found me more pleasing than any of the Assiniboine women. Their words told me why Charging Hawk spent much time in the teepee, something warriors did not do in good weather. He sat on the side making arrows and watching me out of the corner of his eye. If I stared at him, he grinned foolishly. Soon, Charging Hawk had filled a quiver with arrows, each one as long as his arm, to the tips of his fingers. I could tell they were not war arrows because they had narrow blades so that they could be pulled out of the animal's flesh and used again. Arrows meant for battle had short, broad tips with hooks on them so that they stuck tightly and tore the flesh when pulled. On the seventh sun, Charging Hawk oiled his hair with bear grease and wrapped his braids in otter fur. From his ears hung ornaments of polished metal. He put on his finest clothes. His buckskin shirt was decorated with green porcupine quills. From the shoulder straps hung strands of hair from scalps he had taken. On the back was painted a red hand, the sign that he had killed another warrior in hand-to-hand combat. At his throat was a necklace of enormous bear claws. From my seat beside the fire, I watched Charging Hawk place a fox skin on a pole some distance away. He walked to a clearing on the other side of the teepee. When he was certain I looked at him, he pulled a handful of arrows from the quiver at his belt. There were as many arrows as fingers on his two hands. Quickly he shot the arrows, his hands moving so fast that they blurred. Before the first had hit the fox skin, the last was moving through the air. All the arrows hit the skin in a spot no larger than my hand. Without speaking, Charging Hawk plucked the arrows from the pole and marched off. He had shown me his skill as a marksman. I could be certain that those in his teepee would never want for meat. That night a lighting dove told me that Charging Hawk wished to marry me. She said that I was lucky. Most captive women became slaves, but as the wife of Charging Hawk, I would be an Assiniboine. Charging Hawk was a great warrior and a skillful hunter, but I felt only hatred for him. Now I must become his wife. After that day, a lighting dove gave me work to do, but she always worked beside me. She watched me closely and showed me the Assiniboine way to roast roots and dry meat. She showed me how they stored their dried food for winter. She did many things in the Nimipu way, but some were different. I learned how to cook meat as the Assiniboines did. A lighting dove showed me how to dig a hole in the ground and line it with rawhide. She filled the hole with water and put a big chunk of buffalo in it. Into the water she dropped large, red-hot stones from the fire. She kept changing the stones until the water boiled and the meat cooked. Now I knew why her people were called Assiniboines, stone boilers. Suns passed and winter came. The snow lay deep on the ground. A lighting dove helped me make a dress of elk skin. Like my old dress, it was white and a fringe hung from the skirt. But my old dress had long fringe sleeves and beautiful sky blue quills across the shoulders. The new dress had no sleeves. Instead, there was a beaded skin cape that covered the tops of my arms. From beneath the cape hung many ermine tails. The soft fur would keep me warm in the coldest weather. I also had white leggings and moccasins. As we worked, a lighting dove told me about her son. He was so swift, she said, that he could run down a buffalo without a horse. He was so strong that he could lift a grizzly bear above his head. He was so brave that he did not hide behind rocks or trees in battle, but rode up to the enemy and dared them to fire at him. I bowed my head and kept silent. He was also a man without shame, I thought. He had eaten with Swan Necklace and slept in the same teepee, yet he killed his guest to get a rifle. When the dress was finished, a lighting dove called me to the fire. She motioned for me to sit down. Then she took a bone needle and held it in the flame until it glowed. Swiftly she grabbed my ear and thrust the needle through. I screamed with pain and grabbed for my ear. A lighting dove caught my hand. She shook her head and motioned for me to be still. 3 bright drops of blood fell on my fingers. A lighting dove placed a greased stick in the hole to keep it open. Then she did the same to the other ear. This time I sat quietly and did not make a sound, even when the hot needle went through my ear. With words and signs, a lighting dove told me that all Assiniboines had holes in their ears. When the holes were healed, I could marry Charging Hawk. My ears healed too fast. Several times I picked at the wounds to keep them raw. In spite of all I could do, the redness disappeared and the flesh was smooth. The Assiniboines held a great feast to celebrate the wedding of their chief's son. Fires blazed in the camp. Drums beat, whistles shrilled, and flutes made soft noises. After the feasting and dancing and singing, Charging Hawk and I would go to a new teepee. The skins that covered it were painted with buffalo and butterflies, kingfishers and antelope. When I looked at it, I thought of Swan Necklace, and my heart was sad. My sorrow did not show. I put on my new clothes. From my ears hung bangles of silver and blue stones brought from lands far to the south. A lighting dove said they had cost Charging Hawk 3 horses. Because I had no parents to exchange gifts with them, Red Elk and a lighting dove stood on either side of me and asked for the Great Spirit's blessing. At my feet, Charging Hawk laid a beautiful ermine blanket, as white as snow and as soft as a cloud. No one in the tribe had such a beautiful blanket. "This is our marriage blanket," said Charging Hawk. "It is beautiful," I said, though my lips were so stiff it was hard to form the Assiniboine words. Charging Hawk grasped my hand while Red Elk spoke of the wife's duty to her husband and the husband's duty to his wife. He asked the Great Spirit to send us many sons. The men nodded and the women smiled. Someone filled a stone pipe with tobacco and passed it around. Each man took a deep breath and handed it to his neighbor. Charging Hawk drew deeply on the pipe and blew out the smoke. Then he got to his feet and began to dance. He sang to the beat of the drum and danced about the circle of seated men. He grasped one of the warriors by the hand and pulled him to his feet. Together they danced and sang. One by one the other men joined them. At last all the men were dancing and singing. The women clapped their hands. The dancing lasted far into the night. Smoke from the pipes and the fires filled the cold night air. The smoke was so thick that it was hard to see across the circle of dancers. No one paid any attention to me. I waited. When the dancing grew wild and the voices loud, I snatched the ermine blanket and crept away from the circle. I crawled through the line of teepees, stopping only to take a rifle and bullets from the teepee of Red Elk. Once I had reached the edge of the village, I got to my feet and ran faster than I had ever run before.
All right, boys and girls, if you are watching this video and you are not on the live lesson, that is it for you until we return from winter break. I hope you have a safe and wonderful little mini vacation with your families. and I will see you back in 2021.